at one of the country's most respected military academies, a place where discipline echoed through every hallway and leadership was carved into every young cadet. A quiet old librarian spent his days sorting books, dusting shelves, and keeping order in the silent aisle. But the cadets didn't respect him. They laughed at his slow steps, mocked his faded red shirt, snickered at the tremble in his hands, and treated him like he was nothing more than a harmless old man hiding among books. They didn't know his past, didn't recognize the worn war patch sewn onto his faded sleeve, and had no idea he once commanded elite soldiers across battlefields they'd only studied in textbooks. And they certainly didn't expect everything to change the moment a visiting general stepped through the library doors, saw the old man, and froze in shock before snapping into a perfect salute that silenced the entire academy. Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall stained glass windows of the academy library, casting colorful patterns across the polished floors. The old librarian shuffled between the history section shelves, stacking newly returned books with careful, steady movements. He was in his late 70s, maybe early 80s, his white beard neatly trimmed, his faded red work shirt tucked into worn blue jeans, and his old boots complaining softly with every step. His posture was slightly stooped, but his eyes, steel gray and observant, missed nothing. To many cadets, however, he was invisible. To the wrong cadets, he was a target. A group of seniors had made it their morning ritual to harass him whenever they passed through. They swaggered inside, uniforms crisp, boots polished, their smug confidence filling the silent library like smoke. "There he is," one muttered loudly. "Grandpa Dewey Decimal." Another snickered, nudging his friend. "Careful, don't speak too fast. His hearing is from the Stone Age." The others laughed, ignoring the annoyed glances from younger cadets studying nearby. The old librarian didn't react. He simply continued sliding a thick military strategy volume into place, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the spine. But that only encouraged them. One of the seniors strolled up behind him and tapped his shoulder with mock politeness. "Hey, old man," he said, "you sure you're qualified to be in a place like this? These books are older than you, but at least they're still useful." More laughter exploded behind him. The old librarian turned slowly, eyes tired but calm. "Gentlemen," he whispered, "please respect the library environment." The biggest bully scoffed. "Respect? Why would we respect a librarian who can barely stand up straight?" He flicked a finger at the librarian's sleeve. "And what's this ugly patch supposed to be? You steal that from a surplus store." The librarian's eyes lowered. He gently pulled his arm back. His voice remained soft. "It's nothing, son. Please return to your studies." The cadets burst out laughing again. Behind them, several younger students shifted uncomfortably, but none had the courage to speak. The seniors enjoyed every second of the humiliation they were inflicting. But then everything shifted. The library doors swung open with a heavy thud. The echo silenced the room. In stepped a four-star general, full dress uniform, ribbons shining, boots striking the marble floor with authority. Cadets scattered aside instinctively until the general's eyes locked onto the old librarian. His entire body froze, his mouth parted. His expression changed from professionalism to stunned disbelief. Then, to the horror of every cadet present, he snapped into a razor-sharp salute aimed directly at the quiet old librarian they had just mocked. The general's salute held the entire library hostage in silence, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest and refused to let air move. Every cadet stared in disbelief, their eyes flicking between the stiff salute and the old librarian who stood motionless beside a cart of returned books. The old man didn't immediately return the gesture. Instead, his steel-gray eyes widened in quiet shock, as if he hadn't expected to ever see such a salute given to him again. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he raised his trembling hand to his brow and returned the salute with humble precision. When their hands lowered, the general stepped forward with the reverence of someone approaching a monument. "Sir," he said, voice low and almost trembling, "I had no idea you were here." The old librarian offered a gentle smile, though his eyes carried years of buried memories. "I prefer quiet places now," he replied softly. "These shelves don't need much from me." The cadets watched in absolute confusion. The biggest bully, who had mocked the old man's war patch not even a minute earlier, felt his stomach drop. He exchanged panicked glances with his friends, all of them now pale and frozen in place. The general finally turned to the room full of cadets, his expression hardening into something sharp and unforgiving. "What," he said, voice carrying through the aisles like thunder, "is the meaning of this disrespect?" Not a single cadet dared speak. Even those who weren't involved felt their throats tight. The seniors stood stiffly, their earlier arrogance evaporated into cold fear. The biggest bully tried to step back, but the general pointed directly at him. "You," he barked, "front and center." The cadet walked forward mechanically, boots heavy, breath shaking. He swallowed hard as the general towered over him. "Did you mock this man?" The cadet opened his mouth, but no words came out, only a broken whisper. "Sir, I didn't know who he was." The general's eyes flashed. "You shouldn't have to know," he snapped. "Respect is not granted based on rank or age or job." He took a step closer. "It is granted because you wear this uniform, and because the man you mocked made it possible for cowards like you to wear it safely." Gasps spread across the room. The old librarian shook his head softly. "General," he murmured, "let them be. They're young." But the general wouldn't let it go. "Young is no excuse for cruelty," he said, voice tight with emotion. "Especially cruelty toward a man who trained entire battalions, including mine." That revelation stunned the room. The cadets' jaws dropped. Even the younger students behind the tables froze mid-breath. The biggest bully's face flushed crimson. "Yes, sir," he stuttered. "You're telling me he trained you?" The general inhaled deeply, the memory clearly heavy. "Not just me," he said. "Half the leaders in this region. He was one of the toughest instructors the academy ever had." He pointed to the war patch on the old librarian's sleeve. "That patch," his voice softened. "He earned that in a mission that saved dozens of American lives." The bully's eyes filled with shame. One of his friends whispered hoarsely, We had no idea." The general silenced him with a look. "You didn't need to know," he said. "You only needed to behave like soldiers." He then turned to the old librarian with deep respect. "Sir, please allow me to handle this properly." The librarian's eyes softened further. "Handle it with wisdom," he said quietly. "They still have time to become the men they're meant to be." The general nodded slowly, then faced the cadets with a gaze that made every one of them stand straighter. "Then we'll start correcting them now," he said. "All of them." And the weight of judgment settled heavily on the room. The general let the weight of his words settle over the library like a heavy fog, thick enough that even the cadets who hadn't participated stood frozen with second-hand fear. The seniors who had mocked the old librarian looked as if they were standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong breath away from disaster. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated completely. Now their shoulders sagged, their eyes darted between the general and the librarian in panic. The general stepped forward slowly, each boot making a sharp thud against the polished floor. "Every lesson you learn here," he said evenly, "every strategy, every leadership principle, every survival skill, you owe a portion of it to him." He pointed at the librarian, who stood quietly beside a cart of books, the sunlight catching on his worn war patch. "He taught men who later taught your instructors. He shaped soldiers who shaped this academy." The bully, the one who had mocked the patch, swallowed hard, his throat visibly trembling. "Sir," he managed, his voice cracking, we didn't know he was a soldier." The general's stare could have cut granite. "You think respect is only for soldiers?" His voice boomed across the aisles. "You think age makes a man less worthy? You think a quiet job means a quiet legacy?" He stepped closer until he was practically nose to nose with the cadet. "Weak men mock what they don't understand. Strong men show respect regardless." The bully's face flushed with shame. His friends looked equally sickened by their own behavior, eyes pointed downward, hands clasped behind their backs as if holding themselves together. The librarian raised a gentle hand. "General," he said softly, "don't break them. They can still learn." The general inhaled slowly, drawing from that humility. "Then they will learn," he said, "right now." He turned to the seniors. "Fall in." The 5 cadets scrambled into a line so fast they nearly collided. Their boots clicked together, their shoulders squared, but the tremor in their hands exposed their fear. The general paced before them like a storm building, eyes burning with a mix of anger and disappointment. "This academy is not a playground," he said. "Your rank is not a crown. Your uniform is not armor for your ego." He nodded toward the librarian standing quietly, straight-backed though aged. "The man you mocked once carried cadets through blizzards. He slept in mud for days to protect his soldiers. He dragged the wounded to safety under fire. And he trained recruits harder than any of you have ever been pushed." Gasps echoed lightly from the younger cadets watching. The seniors' faces twisted with guilt, each revelation striking like a punch. The bully whispered under his breath, How did we not know?" Another senior answered with raw truth, "Because we never cared enough to ask." The general heard it and nodded. "Exactly." He faced the librarian again. "Sir, if you permit, I will have these cadets shadow you for the next 8 weeks. They will assist in the library, learn discipline, learn humility, and learn what real leadership looks like." The librarian's eyes softened with something like sadness mixed with pride. "If they're willing," he said gently, "I will teach them." The general turned back to the cadets. "You heard him. Are you willing?" The bully stepped forward first, voice barely steady. "Sir, yes, sir, with respect and with apology." One by one, the other seniors echoed him, their voices hushed but sincere. The librarian nodded slowly. "Then there is hope for all of you." The general exhaled, tension easing from his posture. "Good, because the lesson isn't over." He pointed at the war patch. "Before this day ends, you will know what that patch means and why he earned it." The cadets' eyes widened again, knowing the real revelation was still ahead. The cadets stood rigid, their chests tight with anticipation as the general motioned for them to follow. He led the group deeper into the library, past rows of textbooks and strategy manuals, until they reached a quiet, dimly lit corner, the military archives section. The librarian followed silently, his boots soft against the polished floor, his faded red shirt standing out against the shadowed bookshelves. He looked uneasy, as if this part of the past was something he didn't wish to reopen. But the general had already pulled a large, leather-bound folder from a locked shelf, its edges worn, its label faded with age. "Do you know what this is?" he asked the seniors. They shook their heads silently. The general placed the folder gently on a reading table, his fingers lingering on the cover. "This," he said, "is a record of one of the most dangerous training operations ever conducted by this academy. An operation only whispered about because the men who lived through it rarely spoke of what happened." The cadets leaned in, eyes wide, breaths shallow. The general opened the folder. Inside were yellowed papers, faded photographs, mission logs, hand-drawn maps, and a laminated roster of names. And among them, highlighted, underlined, and circled, was the name of the old librarian. The seniors sucked in a breath. "This operation," the general continued, "was known as Nightfall Ridge, a survival test meant to simulate a worst-case ambush, but something went wrong. A storm came in fast, communications died, the terrain flooded, and a group of cadets, my group, were stranded without support." His voice grew quieter, more strained. "We were freezing, lost, half-conscious, and the instructors couldn't find us." He paused, swallowing against the memory. Except for him, all eyes turned to the librarian. The old man lowered his gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. The general continued anyway. "He crossed 3 miles of flooded forest alone, carried 3 cadets at once when the river surged, built a fire in a storm strong enough to snap trees, and when a cadet fell unconscious, he kept him alive through the night with nothing but body heat and grit." The seniors stared, their faces draining of color. The bully whispered, "Sir, that can't be real." The general shot him a glare. "I was one of those cadets," he said sharply. "Everything you see here, every medal I've earned, every role I've served, is because this man refused to let me die." The bully's throat tightened as he turned to look at the librarian again, at the white beard, the tired eyes, the quiet presence he had mocked earlier. The general continued, "We searched for him after he retired, but he vanished into civilian life. No ceremony, no recognition. He chose silence. He stepped closer to the old man, and now I know why." The librarian exhaled heavily, like a man carrying decades on his shoulders. "I didn't want young men treating me differently," he murmured. "I didn't want salutes. I didn't want stories." He glanced at the cadets, his steel-gray eyes calm. "I just wanted to help where I could." The general's voice trembled, not with weakness but with deep respect. Sir, you helped shape us, saved us, and these cadets need to understand the kind of strength you represent." The seniors bowed their heads, ashamed yet deeply moved. The general closed the folder gently. "You mocked him," he said quietly. "Now you will learn from him." The old librarian hesitated, but then gave a slow, accepting nod. "If they're willing," he repeated softly, "then so am I." And with that, the final lesson began. The late afternoon sun poured through the library's tall windows in long golden beams as the seniors gathered around the tables, their attention fixed entirely on the old librarian, who now sat quietly with the Nightfall Ridge folder open in front of him. His white beard caught the fading light, giving him an almost timeless aura, and his faded red shirt seemed to blend with the warmth of the room. The cadets, once loud, smug, and dismissive, now leaned forward with respect so sincere it felt like the very air had changed. The librarian took a slow breath before speaking. "I was never the strongest," he began softly, "never the fastest. In my class I was overlooked, just like you overlooked me." He glanced gently at the biggest bully, whose face burned with guilt. "But I learned something early," he continued. "Leadership isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the one who still stands when everything falls apart." His voice was calm, steady, carrying decades of truth inside it. The cadets hung on to every word. "During Nightfall Ridge," he said, eyes drifting toward the folder, "your commandant was barely conscious when I reached him. He was cold, hurt, afraid, and I was afraid too, but fear doesn't decide who we become, our choices do." The commandant bowed his head, humbled all over again by the memory. The librarian continued, "When I left the academy years later, I chose a quiet life. I thought the world didn't need anything more from me." He let out a gentle sigh. "But I was wrong. Young men always need guidance, especially those who think they don't." The seniors felt those words pierce them deeply. The librarian closed the folder with care, as though sealing away a story that had lived too long in silence. "So now," he said, "let's start with something simple." He stood slowly, placing a hand on the largest table. "Every day after class, you'll come here, you'll help organize the shelves, learn the history of those who came before you, learn how to listen, learn how to lead." The bully swallowed and nodded. "Yes, sir," he whispered, voice thick. "We'll do whatever you ask." The librarian stepped closer to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're not bad boys," he said, "just misdirected, but direction can be corrected." The commandant stepped forward then, standing tall beside the librarian, his presence radiating pride and gratitude. "Cadets," he said, "you will carry today's lesson for the rest of your lives. You will remember that humility is not weakness, that quiet men can be giants, and that legends don't always announce themselves." The seniors stood straighter, their shame now transformed into determination. The librarian offered a small smile. "I don't ask for salutes," he said softly, "but I do ask for growth." Without hesitation, without command, the cadets raised their hands in a unified, crisp salute. This time it wasn't forced, it wasn't ordered, it was earned. The librarian blinked,